Welcome to UpLift Women's Wellness. I'm Bethany Bush, founder of Head to Toe Strength.
And I'm Auria Zahed, a licensed marriage and family therapist. We're here to empower and inspire women to thrive through holistic wellness.
Each week, we'll dive into topics like fitness, mental health, and personal growth.
And share real conversations and actionable insights to help you live your strongest, healthiest life.
Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started.
So I'm super excited today because we have Alexa, and she is an LMFT, and she's going to talk about her specialty, which I really appreciate, Alexa, because as you know, Bethany and I are childless. So we also want to make sure that we represent mothers, people going through pregnancy currently. Alexa also brought up something really cool right before we started recording, which is talking about moms who are having their second child and the things that may potentially come up there. So, Alexa, do you want to intro yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Alexa Levine. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a private practice in California, and so I see women virtually. I'm located in San Diego, but my practice is entirely virtual, so I can see anyone in California. And yes, I specialize in perinatal mental health, and so pretty much, I would say, almost 100% of my clients are either pregnant or postpartum, or just, within the first couple of years of motherhood. And so, yeah, I have a lot of advanced training in perinatal mental health, and that's really what I am very passionate about.
Amazing. Well, again, I'm super excited to have you and pick your brain, Alexa. So we do really care about women's wellness. So I would love for you to kind of go over all the stages of thinking about having children all the way to having children that a woman might go through, and what you've noticed mentally that come up for women, and kind of affirming this is totally normal. There's nothing wrong with you. And when you think it's time for maybe women to seek mental health services or any advice you could give.
Yeah. So let's see. So I think that therapy and even couples therapy too are so important, even before, preferably, honestly, before you are trying to conceive or before, pregnancy happens. And of course, that's not to say if you come in and you're already pregnant, already have a baby, that's great too. But I do love the experience of getting to work with a woman who is, considering having a child, not sure sort of timeline or what that looks like for them or when they would want it to happen. And they really just want to get a better understanding of, what they think makes a good mom and what was modeled to them, and really diving into their own family dynamics. And so I really love to just sort of ask them, hey, describe how your mom parented you and what was that like? What are some things that you feel like you would love to continue doing? What are some things that you actually would love to, maybe be a cycle breaker and not continue, and just really get some clarity of what does that role of motherhood even look like to you? Because I think it's really easy to, especially once you're already pregnant or you already have your baby, jump into what everyone else thinks a good mom is. And so if you have that sort of belief system and your core values and beliefs already sifted through, already worked through in therapy with a therapist, then you come in knowing what's actually important to you and not just what is important to, everyone around you once you are already in the trenches. So that would be the ideal place to start. And then, and also just as with your partner, like, what does it look like? What are my expectations for you? What are your expectations of me? Like financially, like, how are we going to do this? Who's going to go back to work first? Do I need to go back if I decide I want to take more time off? Is that something that's going to be possible or realistic for us? And also just sort of like, what do you think your role is as like a support person or as a partner during pregnancy, during labor and delivery, and then obviously like once we have our baby? Because I think people are really surprised at like, how their partner's answers might be different than what they thought that their partner would say. And so having those conversations as soon as possible and really working through those kind of like different expectations, I think is so important, and I think can definitely help pregnancy and postpartum just go so much smoother. And then let's see, so during pregnancy, and it's so hard because pregnancy is like everything on the spectrum. Like there's people who are like, I love being pregnant, it's like one of the best experiences for me, these 40 weeks go by really quickly and I just love it and it feels great. And I'm really connected to my body, I'm really connected to my baby, and for them it's just like a really positive overall experience. And for other people, I have clients who are absolutely traumatized by having hyperemesis, and they are so sick from pretty much conception all the way until delivery. And so for 40 weeks, they are in bed, they're throwing up, they are, and also what that physical impact does to your mental health, you can imagine. It's traumatizing. You have no energy. You are sick all the time. You're in a terrible headspace. A lot of times you're not able to work. You're not able to prepare any like for the baby or do any type of like special baby moon or spend time with your friends or do things that you want to do because you are so sick. And I think it's also really easy to feel like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I'm so miserable now that I guess this is just what the rest of my life is going to look like now after I have a baby. And so, pregnancy is just, and, if you have complications during pregnancy, that is so incredibly stressful also. So people's experience of pregnancy is just like, could not be, more different. And so I just want to point that out that, some people just feel like while they're pregnant, they don't really need therapy because it's going really well. And other people, it is just, it's traumatizing, or they've had a loss in the past, and, being pregnant after a loss has its own set of, challenges, and not knowing, okay, can I be excited? I'm pregnant, but does that mean I'm still going to be pregnant tomorrow? It's so much grief also, and thinking about what happened to the previous pregnancy, and processing, what did that look like for you? What was that like for your partner? What was that like for your relationship? You know what I mean? Because people grieve differently. So really important to be processing that also. And so that's what I would say. And I think also, coming and getting support and therapy while you're pregnant, it is just so valuable also, just because then I have a relationship with the client. I already know their family dynamics. We've had a chance to, kind of go over, hey, who are we hoping is going to support you? Who are we a little bit nervous about, maybe like not having great boundaries or coming over unannounced, or, all of those things. How do we troubleshoot that? What are your expectations for your partner? What are you guys currently going through together? What's their work situation? What's yours? What other stressors are coming up? Who are you comfortable talking about pregnancy with? Who maybe, if you have friends that are trying to conceive, maybe you're not comfortable sharing that news with them. So, and then it really just gives us such a solid foundation. And so that way, when they are postpartum and they need a lot of support and they feel like they are really delicate, we're not starting from zero. They already know me. They already trust me. There's that rapport and relationship already built. So I would say, even if your pregnancy is going really smoothly and you want to just prepare for postpartum, it is always so important to be meeting with a therapist during pregnancy. If nothing else, to have that support already in place, already establishing that relationship, and then having that go-to person who already knows the entire situation. So you don't have to explain any of that when you're postpartum and exhausted and recovering from labor and delivery.
Well, Alexa, so you were saying that kind of the pregnancy process is so different for every woman. Do you have like advice for if there was maybe like an ideal pregnancy and it didn't exactly go that way? Like it's a little bit more emotionally and physically tough than expected?
Yeah, and I think, even if or even when things are physically going well, like everything looks good at the appointments, everything looks good at the scans, it brings up so many deep-rooted maybe feelings and insecurities and expectations for yourself that maybe were dormant for a while, or maybe you just never really realized were there. Pregnancy is so vulnerable, both physically and emotionally. You are just, you're very vulnerable. And so I would say that people are often surprised that even when physically things, quote unquote, like going pretty well and like all of their appointments are going well, they're surprised at how their mental health really does decline, and they start having intrusive thoughts, and they are very anxious about labor and delivery. And that's all really common, but not necessarily normal or not optimal or not healthy. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you're having those quote unquote common experiences, it doesn't mean that you don't deserve support. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve treatment. And so I would say, and people often have a lot of guilt, oh, well, my pregnancy is going really well, and the doctor said everything was fine, so why aren't I feeling fine? Why am I still anxious? Why am I still feeling depressed? Why aren't I, feeling more connected to my baby? All of those types of things. And so I think, there's some sort of gaslighting we do it ourselves, where it's oh, well, everything looks fine, so I should feel, great. And it's not realistic, and it's not really fair to us. And so I think those are things that we often work through in therapy. And then as far as people who have really difficult physical pregnancies and just have a lot of physical issues, nausea, headaches, no energy, fatigue, there's a lot of guilt and sort of shame around being exhausted all the time and being I didn't even do anything today. Why am I so tired? And just sort of really examining wow, why is the expectation for you to never be able to feel tired, or to feel even when you're pregnant, you still, need to be earning I don't know, just sort of energy or approval, or you should still be operating as if you're not pregnant, and really diving into where all of those expectations come from, because I think a lot of people don't realize they even have those expectations of themselves. Especially when you're able to do a million things at once. And so pregnancy really forces people to slow down. And I think that that's also really important to work through in therapy.
Yes, that was so helpful, Alexa. And actually, I can't help but notice a lot of the themes that Bethany and I talk about a lot. Is there's a perfect woman kind of propaganda, and that women are shown constantly, and no one really talks about the truth. So there's a perfect pregnancy propaganda. And then, you were saying, women are gaslighting themselves when they're feeling tired, when their body is literally creating another human. So it's really important to talk about how there's spectrums of things, and there isn't one right way or one correct way. And people need to be honest with themselves with how they feel versus judgmental.
Yeah, 100%. And I think especially, you're so right. And there's this perfect woman, and there's also this perfect pregnant woman, and this perfect, I think to myself, I hear clients a lot well, I shouldn't have gained this much weight, or I shouldn't be showing this quickly, or I look like I'm too pregnant. Oh, I look like I'm further along than I am. And people think I'm, and it also gives people free range to just comment on your body. So people for some reason feel if you're pregnant, that somehow means that they're allowed to touch you and comment on how pregnant you look or don't look, or how far along you look, or you look further along than you are. And are you having all of these terrible, really toxic body comments that people just make all the time to pregnant women. And I just don't understand why people feel that is somehow okay. I definitely don't think it is. And I definitely hear, a lot in pregnancy, a lot of judgment about how people's body change, and just sort of okay, yeah, I knew that I, was going to gain weight, or my body was going to change when I was pregnant, but this is a lot harder than I thought it would be, or I thought I would be gaining X amount of weight, or I thought my body would only gain weight in a certain part of my body that looks, I'm imagining I don't know, just like the perfect like bowling ball, and the rest of your body is totally unchanged when you're pregnant. And that being like, you know, like kind of like what you're talking about, like the ideal woman or like, you know, Stepford wife or whatever. And so when that doesn't happen, it's really, really hard. And I think there's a lot of, if people had also maybe had previously had like an eating disorder or like body dysmorphia or just like difficulty with like body acceptance in general, pregnancy just, I mean, all of that really, really hits hard, and it really resurfaces a lot of those beliefs that they maybe had previously thought they had worked through.
I was just going to say that because as I've worked through clients in the phases of either postpartum or trying to get pregnant or during pregnancy, how often I have to have that conversation of like, okay, you've been in an athletic build or frame for X amount of years, X amount of time. Let's talk about what's going to happen. Now, do you work with clients who go from like that elite athlete physique into pregnancy where they're like not just the weekend warrior, but they've spent years, you know, healing their eating disorder and their body image issues, and now they're going through that phase of life where it's like it's pregnancy time and it's like I don't know this body that I'm in?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I don't specifically specialize in seeing athletes, especially people who, you know, are really like high level and used to like being really, you know, involved in athletics. And that was actually something that I would probably refer to because it is so important and it's so nuanced and so specialized. And I think that like also just like that identity and that attachment to like your body being a certain way, and then also using that as a sense of like worth and just sort of like, okay, if my body looks like this, then it means I am worthy of, you know, feeling like this, making this much money, doing this XYZ. And if it's not, then I'm not. And so I think like, but yeah, to answer your question, like not specifically athletes, but definitely just sort of women in general of feeling really, really terrified and just sort of like, wait a second, if this is no longer my body, how I'm used to it being, then what does that mean for me? What does that mean for what people think about me? What does that mean for like my self-worth and how I'm used to taking care of myself and how I'm used to proving myself? And it's really scary to not have that piece of your identity. And especially if you're not able to, you know, do some of that or any of it during pregnancy or postpartum, it is just a major identity shift and a lot of grief.
That's what I hear from my clients in postpartum that were hardcore like power lifters or big time lifters, and then lifted all the way through pregnancy, and then now in postpartum it's very much like, well, I don't know who I am anymore because I can't do anything. I don't do anything. You know, my body doesn't look right, and just like working through those phases. Do you do a lot? I mean, Auria and I talk a lot about body image and like the ideal woman. Do you also work a lot with the body image aspect of pre, during, and post?
Yeah, for sure. And I think honestly, it's a lot of grief work. It's a lot of, you know, letting go of like, you know, part of your identity about who you were and your relationship to your body and what your body looked like or felt like prior to pregnancy and then during and after, you know, because yes, like definitely some women are able to, you know, either during pregnancy or postpartum get back to some extent, like, you know, some version of who they were before. But the reality is that you have a different body. You know what I mean? Your body has gone through pregnancy. Your body has gone through labor and delivery. Your body has gone through postpartum. And so I think really managing the body image and the expectations and just, again, like, of course, like bounce back culture of like, you know, we see like celebrities or whatever, like, oh, 2 weeks after having a baby. And like, I can't, you know, no one even knew that I, you know, gave birth 2 weeks ago. Like that's some badge of honor. And I hate that. I think it is just, it's so toxic. It's so harmful. It's like terrible for everyone involved in that. And I just don't think that like, you know, the goal should be like, you look like you've never had a baby, because you have had a baby. And that's an incredible, you know what I mean, thing that you and your body have done. And why are we trying to pretend like it never happened? And like, why is that the ideal of like seeing a mom with like either a baby or like a toddler who looks like they never had a baby. And I feel like that's just spoken as like the gold star, like, wow, you have a child, or you have 2 or 3 kids, and like, you know, you never even look like you had one. And like, what message is that sending to everyone, to men, to women, to children? I mean, literally, it's literally toxic to everyone involved. And I think, you know, with the body image, again, it's sort of like, you know, let's process why you know, were so, like, what did having that previous body mean to you? And what do we want to hold on to and potentially, you know, get back in a different way? And what can we let go of? You know what I mean? And everyone has a different answer. You know, some people are actually like, oh, I'm like relieved that actually I used to get up at 4 a.m. and do, you know, 2 hours of CrossFit or whatever. And now actually I kind of realized that like, I don't actually need to do that anymore to like prove to myself that I can. And there can be a lot of like self-compassion in that, which is amazing. And then for other people, it's, listen, like I want to be able to get back to this, and which is fine, but I want to understand their why. You know what I mean? Are they doing it because they feel like they have to, because that's their only sense of like proving their worth to themselves or other people? Or are they doing it because they genuinely like that type of movement and it feels good to them, and that's just what they do? So the why is the most important part.
That is so helpful, Alexa. Because I'm after listening to you, you're brilliant, by the way. But it brings up a lot for me of like, because I don't want to have children and I have millions of reasons why, and here women being so powerful, bringing kids into the world, but they're worried about what they look like. Like it really frustrates me. And I am all about like ideally representation in media. And you're right, like the reason why there's this bowling ball belly ideal is because actresses just wear little circular baby bellies to be a pregnant woman, and that's what we see. And then we don't really get to see actual women, like regular women who are not paying for a private chef, for plastic surgery immediately, right? So it's really sad to me that that's where women's minds go when they have a million other things on their plate. But it's like it's a much bigger issue, because like you were saying, Alexa and Bethany, it's like women put worth into physical appearance. And now are they feeling unworthy, undeserving, on top of women already feeling unworthy, undeserving? When again, you just brought a child here, like you need to be at your A game and you can't.
Yeah.
It seems like a very simple fix to me. Society, fix it.
Society, wake up. Pull your head out of the hole.
It's so true. And it's like, you know, I feel like there's also this like countdown of like, okay, I'm a month postpartum, so, you know, I should be this far along in like my whatever postpartum bounce back body journey, and like by 6 months and by a year, you know what I mean? Hopefully the goal is I can show up at my kid's first birthday party and again look like I never had a baby. And I feel like, especially with social media, even if that's not the caption of this is me at my kid's first birthday party and it looks like I never had a baby, that's totally the messaging that like most of us or all of us are getting. And it is just, you know, you're already the most vulnerable. There's always so much guilt and shame. It's never enough. Either you're working and people have an issue with that, or you're not working or people have an issue with that, or, you know, it's just the amount of scrutiny that, you know, is on pregnant and postpartum women is just next level. And to add on this ticking time of just, you have X amount of time to get your quote unquote body back, it's so real and it's so dangerous.
And I agree that it's dangerous because I get the 6-week doctor mark quoted at me, and I'm like, I can't just be like, all right, for example, like in my role within our company, you can't just go right back underneath a 150-pound barbell that you were doing up to month 10. Like, whoa. Like, well, the doctor said I'm okay. I'm like, yes, physically the doctor said that. The doctor's not a physiologist. The doctor doesn't know, how to fix your diastasis recti, and it doesn't know how to heal your pelvic floor and like turn all these things on. Like that's also the equally terrifying part from my perspective is like you're trying to quote unquote bounce back like Margot Robbie, who's got the world's best on top of everything, but with a regular life and with a regular economy and a regular, on top of feeding a baby and not sleeping, like it terrifies me because it's so harmful and you can get so permanently hurt.
100%. Yeah. And you're so right with the 6 week. I think when a lot of people hear that like 6 week, like check in, it's basically like what they're hearing is like, okay, so it's like 6 weeks. All right. Time is up to like really be postpartum. And now it's time to like, quote unquote, get back on track, like get my diet going, get my exercise routine going. Like my doctor said, everything's clear. I should basically be functioning as though like, prior to even getting pregnant and just go back to all of those expectations. So that is so true. There's something about that 6 week, like, okay, have sex. Okay. Start exercising, do anything you would normally do. And it is just, it's so dangerous. And that sort of like, quote unquote, sense of like a permission slip of like, and it's not only permission, but it's almost, I think a lot of people hear it as pressure and like, okay, it's been 6 weeks, get it together. And it is so unfair. And I know that there's, I'm sure plenty of OBs who don't frame it like that. But unfortunately, I think because of what a lot of like societal pressure and social media is showing us, is that's what a lot of women kind of go into that appointment thinking is, okay, once I'm cleared my postpartum, it's all over. You know what I mean? And I'm back to being who I was prior to pregnancy and having my baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just like, we are talking about it in very like specific language of what women think and are saying to themselves, but also like think of the mental health burden that trying to balance all these things plus raising your first baby brings on. It's a lot. It's too much.
It really is. It really is. And I feel like in so many ways, like we just set women up to fail because when we're giving them all of these expectations that are literally impossible to meet on top of all of the biological, pregnancy and labor and delivery and postpartum does to your body with no time to recover. You know what I mean? Like literally like, okay, well, you had, a C-section and here's your baby and go recover from major abdominal surgery while taking care of your newborn. Or you just had a vaginal delivery and whether or not it was traumatic, whether or not you needed all of these interventions or whether or not it took 3 days or whatever, like here's your baby and you should be able to do it because, I did like, from a lot of parents, like their parents, oh, well, I did it. Well, I went to work, a week later, what's the problem? And so much just like shame and intergenerational trauma, honestly, of just sort of what's going on for women postpartum, that it's really no wonder that postpartum is, it is so hard and it's even harder than I think it even needs to be because of all of the expectations that we're under and the lack of support.
And like Auria speaks to like one of the comments that I just got the other day was, well, you can just get the husband stitch. And I'm like, don't perpetuate that. That is not okay. Like, don't keep bringing that up and like keep it like, because if you speak it, it gives it power. And I was like, no, because it doesn't matter. You just went through major surgery. What he wants doesn't mean shit.
Yeah, it's really, really, really hard, especially when they're not, it's really hard. And that's honestly like I have a lot of women come in and then I also refer a lot of them to a couples therapist to go with their so they come in for individual work with me and then they'll do couples work with their partner because, oh my gosh, it brings up so many things, as you can imagine, in relationships, and also just the socialization of being a woman and being a mom and what that looks like. And, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, like what your husband, or like, you know, the thought what the dad should do, what they shouldn't do, like when you're asking too much, when you're not. And like a lot of times, you know, the mother-in-law also commenting like, wow, your dad never changed a diaper and my son just changed a diaper, so I'm parent of the year over here, you know, and all the praise that a lot of times men get for, of course, doing one thing out of the 100 things that moms are doing. And of course there's exceptions, blah blah blah, but like it's really, really, really hard. And I think that especially as women, we just internalize and go back to we're doing something wrong. And so then it turns into, I'm not grateful and I have this amazing partner and, you know, they help with the baby and I have a friend and their partner doesn't even do anything. And so why, you know, I can't possibly be blah, blah, you know what I mean? Like all of that sort of like guilt and shame that we put on ourselves. It's really hard. And I think actually couples therapy is so helpful during this time because some of the partners don't even realize that they have all of these kind of embedded expectations of what they thought they were supposed to do or not do. And it really is helpful for them to have that, especially with a neutral party kind of helping with the conversation.
Yes, I completely agree. I think people do have expectations, but it should just be like a partnership conversation where everything's just hashed out. Like you were saying initially, Alexa, like, let's talk about what you're going to do, what I'm going to do, who needs what, when. I think that would help a lot. Because again, like, where did these expectations come from to begin with? And it's weird how we don't say, like, every marriage is different and everybody needs to talk about their needs and their expectations of each other and their expectations of themselves. Have you heard that advice prior?
Not really. I mean, I think when people are actually invested in doing the work and like really invested in, you know, sort of like, I don't want to say like child-proofing their marriage or their relationship, but that is kind of what I want to say, that which is they're talking about these things and they're asking these questions and they're really putting in a lot of thought, especially, you know, when they're thinking about getting pregnant or during pregnancy, and really hashing out a lot of these like, man, like what do I think my role should be? What do I think makes a good father? What do I think, you know, makes a good mom? And being able to have those conversations beforehand is so incredibly helpful because obviously, yeah, I'm not saying that like, then when you're postpartum, you guys have already talked about all this and, you know, now it's smooth sailing. No, but you already have that sort of foundation. You already understand where the other person is coming from and what their expectations are and why. And I think it is so much easier to have those conversations when you're postpartum, already having that under your belt and already being used to having those conversations, as opposed to just waiting until the baby's here and then you're both depleted, it's exhausting, you're both sort of at your worst, and then you're trying to also navigate these conversations. So that really is just another huge, like, ideally having both you in your own individual therapy sessions and doing therapy together for couples is really the ideal scenario. And I know that seems like kind of daunting, maybe like, oh my gosh, individual therapy and couples. But the thing is that when you're in couples therapy, it is so vital that you have your own space with your therapist to process what happened during couples. Because to some extent, I guess you can process in couples therapy, like with the other person there, but it's a totally different conversation when it's you and a therapist that you trust, and you're able to really work through what came up during that session. So that would be so incredibly helpful. And then, you know, when you're postpartum, you already have a couples therapist that knows you and understands your dynamic, and you're already set up with a therapist, because it's really important. And say, like, having your relationship as sturdy as it could possibly be, I think is one of the best things you can do to prepare for postpartum.
Yeah, so helpful, Alexa. Yeah. Can you speak to what you've heard the most when women deliver a baby and it's their first experiences as a mom? What that what that looks like?
Yeah, it's sort of similar to pregnancy in that I think some people, obviously birth is never easy. It's never completely straightforward or whatever. There's almost always something that doesn't go according to plan. However, I would definitely say that it runs the gamut of like, I have some people come in and they're like, yeah, birth was really challenging, but I felt really supported. I had a really good, OB or midwife. I was able to do things the way that I wanted to do them. I felt like I was really empowered. I felt like my wishes were respected. And so, yes, it was definitely, challenging in its own way. But like overall, I feel like it was like an empowering, like positive experience, all the way to like really significant birth trauma and medical abuse that happens, and things happening without their consent, and emergency C-sections, or hours and hours and hours of pushing only to then have something go terribly wrong. And so with birth, it's really difficult to almost like, there is kind of no, like, I always go into it with like, hey, what was it like for you? Tell me your birth experience, because it could literally be anywhere from the most, or if not, the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you, to like something that was actually like difficult, but really empowering and overall, pretty smooth. So I never go in with any sort of like preconceived, like, oh yeah, this, birth is probably pretty easy for them, or birth is probably really difficult for them. Like, it's so important to really let the client tell you what it was like for them. And I think that also plays a huge role in postpartum. You know what I mean? Because obviously someone who had an extremely traumatic, well, first of all, pregnancy, that's going to set you up. Even if the birth did go, as smoothly as possible, that person is at such a higher risk, having a really difficult time postpartum, because they were just in a really difficult headspace and physical space for their entire pregnancy. That's very different than someone who had a very straightforward, smooth pregnancy. Same with birth. And so I think that when people come in to postpartum having birth trauma, having a really difficult birth, it is such a different starting point than someone who had their wishes respected and, everything went smoothly. So yeah, and I think that it's also where it's really important not to like, I know it is very important for moms to like get together, and especially when they have babies similar, ages, whatever. But I always just like encourage them to like, this is not a competition. Do not compare your birth to them and then your postpartum to them, because literally aside from having a baby around the same time, none of the other metrics are similar. And so you can both valid to however you feel, and, that support is really important. And we cannot take two people who had completely different pregnancies or births and be like, oh, wow, they're in such a similar, state because they both have babies that are 2 months old. Like, no. That we do spend a good amount of time processing, birth and labor and delivery, and what that was like for them physically and emotionally. And if they felt like they were empowered and listened to, or if they felt like, they were just a body and someone just kind of took over and told them to lay down and shut up and basically like not advocate for themselves. And that happens a lot too. I think people, including myself, when I had my first baby, was very much like, I was just, a vessel, and the mission was get the baby out, and no one told me what was going on or had my consent to anything that was going on. I remember like an OB I had never met, like literally stormed into my room at 4 a.m, or maybe it was like, yeah, it was about 4 a.m. It was still totally dark. My husband and I were sleeping. I had already been in the hospital for like 5 days with magnesium drip for preeclampsia. And she basically was like, all right, 4 a.m, we're breaking your water. Let's do it. It's go time. Like, this is a good time for me. I'm in between, some other people. So let's go. And I will never, I don't even know how to describe. It's hard for me to even put into words how I felt at that moment, and then pretty much the entire time after, because it really was an out-of-body experience. And it really was like, I'm not a person anymore. I don't have preferences anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. And they want to get the baby out, and however they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And so that was really, really traumatic, as you can imagine. And that's why prior to having my second child, I did a lot of research on, medical abuse and, consent, and what my rights were as a patient. And I got a doula and made sure that they were aware of what my preferences were and that they were there like as another set of eyes and ears, because when there's someone else in the room who knows what's going on and who understands all of the different interventions and all of those things, there is a massive, in my opinion, level of security that is not there without someone else, like a doula who knows what's going on. And even if they're not saying anything, I think the staff, I had hospital births for both of my babies. But I think that even the staff knowing there's someone else watching is just a major level of security that I needed, especially with what happened the first time around. And so, yeah, and I think, to that point too, like moms that come in who are pregnant with their second or thinking about being pregnant with their second, it is so important to work through their pregnancy and labor and delivery with their first prior to having that, coming up with their second, because it's really hard, and when you had a really traumatic experience the first time, it's very difficult for your body and your nervous system to not just think that that's what's going to happen again, because that's the only experience that it knows. And so that is, again, where therapy, especially with someone who really understands perinatal mental health, is so crucial, whether it's your first birth or, your second or third or whatever.
Thank you so much for bringing up that level of medical abuse, because Auria and I have discussed this at lengths and just how women are treated within the medical community. So thank you so much for speaking, even though it's a horrible situation and I'm so sorry you experienced it. But it is so common. Every woman is medically abused in some way, shape, or form. And I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, for sure. It's so important. And I would just say my biggest, especially in terms of, labor and delivery, is just really have a support team there for you, like preferably a doula who like really understands what all of these interventions are. Like I had a doctor tell me that like, can't remember, but it was basically like they were like, oh, there's 2 interventions we can do and they're exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter which one you choose, so just choose. And thank God I asked them to leave and my doula hadn't gotten there yet, but I called her and I was like, okay, so they're saying that these 2 things are exactly the same thing. And again, thank God she was like, that absolutely is not, of course they're not this, what do you say, like, of course they're not the same thing, you know what I mean? There's not 2 things that are like, oh yeah, this is like identical, it doesn't even really matter which one you like. No, of course it matters. Like, it's completely different. And the fact that they're framing it as like a no, like, oh yeah, whatever, is totally dishonest and really dangerous. And so thank God I had her to sort of work through. And again, of course, doulas, they're not medical providers. They're not giving you medical advice. What they are doing is providing you with all of the information that you need in order to make decisions that are right for you. And that's really what I needed. And she provided like, hey, this is what this intervention does. And these are likely what happens after. And this is likely the interventions that you're going to have to get after this intervention. And this is what this one does. And this is how long it takes. And that like, so really helping you advocate and making an informed decision, because also I think a lot of people are like, well, my partner will be there, so that can just be what they do. And it's like, that's really not like, I mean, I think unless your partner has, some type of like doula or experience with like labor and delivery or something, which would be great. Most people's partners don't have that experience. And also, they're in a really like, it's a really difficult circumstance for them too. Like they're watching their partner go through something extremely difficult, and they're, really stressed out and usually really anxious and like going through like with all their own fears and their own stuff. So I just think for most people, relying on your partner to be that person to advocate and like inform you of all the things that are happening and expecting them to like be able to even like, understand what's going on is likely not really fair, you know what I mean, to your partner who really deserves to be there as like your emotional support and not like someone watching out for and protecting you from like medical trauma.
Yes, absolutely. Nor do they even understand women's bodies.
Yeah. Like they don't.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alexa. That was so helpful. And like Bethany was saying, I'm so sorry that happen to you, but it is a fantastic example of what women go through all the time. And unfortunately, from a like stereotypical level, and I hope I'm wrong, Bethany, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the birthing industry in hospitals is very turn and burn. And it's kind of like there's only so many hospital beds. We can only have you here for so long.
Well, you
right?
have to factor in insurance too, Aria, of what they will pay for, what they will cover, how quickly you have to get out. Otherwise, you're spending thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands trying to heal. So you also, on top of like, yes, the hospitals are there to turn and burn and get you out, but also your insurance company's doing the same thing.
Yeah, insurance has so much to do with, what happened for patient care. And, sort of on a similar subject that, I was able to take, or I wasn't able to, I managed somehow to take insurance for a long time in my private practice. And, they were just cutting people off so early. They were cutting people off in the middle of like really dangerous, like postpartum depression, really dangerous postpartum anxiety. And just saying, well, we already gave you 4 sessions, and so you should be cured by now, and really made it impossible for me as a perinatal mental health provider to continue to be in network with them because it was just it was dangerous for me. It was dangerous for the client. So right now I am only out of network, so clients can use their PPO plan and hopefully they have out of network benefits, or they pay out of pocket, and they do that because they know that like I'm not going to cut them off, you know what I mean, in the middle of when they need care the most. And it's awful that this is the position that both providers and clients are put in, but I can't be in a position to where I'm cutting services off for a client who desperately needs them because insurance doesn't feel like providing any more sessions. And that unfortunately has happened to me many, many times, which has led to where I am now as far as not being able to be in network.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it is understandable, Alexa, like based off what you said, because you would not be doing a service to your clients if you were agreeing with the cutoff times. As the provider, you should be working with the client on timing. While we're on this topic, Alexa, can you go over how common postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety are, and just briefly about what that means for new moms?
Yeah, so I would say for a lot of the moms that I see, they have had maybe a history, or most of them I would say have a history of depression or anxiety at some point in their lives prior to pregnancy and postpartum. And so those like clients I like to remind, like, because there are so many stressors involved in pregnancy and postpartum, they are usually at a higher risk of postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, because also like a lot of the coping skills they're used to using to manage their depression and anxiety are no longer available to them when they are super new postpartum. So for example, we just tell people, just go take a walk, go outside, go get some alone time, go, sleep, make sure you're sleeping, 8 or 9 hours a night, make sure you're taking care of yourself, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that is very unrealistic for the vast majority of people who just had a baby. So I would say, and that's the other good thing too, is that postpartum depression and anxiety, like, they're very treatable and people definitely can get better, but it does require treatment and it does require, support. And so that's where therapy is so incredibly helpful. And then also if the client wants to be on medication, I would more than happy to provide and coordinate care with a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner who specializes in perinatal mental health, who really understands, the pros and cons and also the risks and the benefits, because, just saying like, well, there's no, a provider who just says there's no reason for you to take medication ever when a woman is like severely struggling or even just struggling in general would definitely not be someone that I would be comfortable coordinating care with, because there is definitely a risk for women to not get the help that they need, to not get on medication if they want it or, need it, or both. And so I think that, it's very important that they have the option and that they don't feel guilty about having the option, or they don't feel guilty about utilizing medication if that's what they want to do. And that can be really helpful in conjunction, of course, with therapy. So I would say, it is definitely, and I would say it's becoming potentially more and more common because of the insane expectations that we talked about before. So women always feeling like they're falling short, never doing enough, never measuring up, and the lack of any type of like financial support in general. Like some people have family close by, whether or not they're even hopeful is a different story. And then of course, if you don't have family or community close by, it's you and the baby and maybe your partner, and depending on how long they're able to take off of work. So I guess what I'm saying is there's so many societal reasons that I think that this is becoming more and more common, in addition to, of course, being like all the chemical and biological reasons that it's also happening.
Well, and even as you say that, the whole like get over it that women have been battling their whole lives is also starting to turn back up again, and like just bear it, just grit and bear it, just deal with it, get over it. Can you, quote unquote, ever actually work through all of the postpartum anxiety and depression truly without support?
I don't know. I mean, I'm lucky in that I get to work with people who, are actively seeking support, which is amazing. And I have so much like respect and, admiration for my clients who understand and, like seek out and invest in support. I think it would be really, really, really difficult to overcome postpartum anxiety and or depression without, some type of professional support. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but I think that it is just so much safer to have professional support when you're going through that.
Because we do not need to sit down and just deal with every single aspect of being a woman.
Definitely not. Absolutely not. And, that leads to some really dangerous places when people are gaslit and told, well, I did it, or, no one helped me, and, blah, 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 all of that type of, it's so dangerous. It's so toxic.
Alexa, if you wouldn't mind, since we are women's wellness, can you talk about how common miscarriage is? Because I feel like people don't talk about that enough. And any advice with coping, and any advice regarding not feeling shame or guilt, and whatever you feel like comes to mind when I bring up that topic.
Yeah. So I believe the miscarriage, I think the statistic is 1 in 4 women will have a miscarriage at some point in their reproductive years. And so it is extremely common, and that does not make it any less painful and traumatic and extremely, extremely difficult for a lot of people. And I think that this whole sort of, wait 12 weeks before you tell anyone, like, it's really I think it really puts the woman who is pregnant on the, like, at the disadvantage, because basically, are we only allowed to tell people like good news, or are we only allowed to like get support if it's a viable pregnancy? And so, because I feel like what that message is like, well, if you have a miscarriage before 12 weeks, which obviously can happen after 12 weeks, but a lot of people wait for that 12-week mark out of their first trimester to tell people. I feel like the message that we're getting is just sort of like, well, you don't want to burden anyone, with that information in case the pregnancy is not viable. So just wait and make sure that like it is before you get other people involved. And I just feel like that is so unfair. And the first trimester for so many women is so challenging. Physically, you're not feeling like yourself, you're exhausted, you're having a lot of hormonal and mood changes. You really need a lot of support. And so the fact that we are pressured into not sharing with anyone, including friends, family, our employers, all of that for the first trimester, just seems really cruel and unfair. And I think it also just sets women up to, like, if they do have a miscarriage, they're on their own. And you know what I mean? They're having to bear all of that by themselves, which is just really, really sad. And I feel like it's this whole sort of like, okay, well, we only want to know if it's a viable pregnancy. If it's not a viable pregnancy, then we don't want to hear about it. And so I always tell people, like, a lot of times in session, people will ask me, like, well, I'm only 6 weeks pregnant. Like, is it okay if I tell people? And I always tell them, like, you can tell whoever you want, whenever you want, at whatever point you want. You know what I mean? Like, you do not need, like, if waiting feels good to you because you just decided that, you know what, you would rather wait until 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 20, whatever it is, like, and we work through that and it's really just something that feels aligned for you, wonderful, let's do that. But if you're saying, well, I want to wait because I, you know, in case I miscarry, I don't want, you know, so-and-so to be upset, or I don't want so-and-so to, like, whatever, judge me or whatever, then that's a completely different conversation. And I actually, like, you know, when I see people on social media posting like really like early that they're pregnant, like, great, you know what I mean? And because then if something does happen, like, hopefully the community will be there to support them, and not only support them if they miscarry. And so I am a huge advocate for normalizing telling people that you're pregnant literally whenever you want. And if that's as early as whenever you find out, like, great. You know, and I also tell people, you know, who are you going to want to know if something does go wrong? Who are you going to want support and need support from? Because then, like, it totally makes sense to me that either way, of course, you tell those people that you're pregnant as early as you want to, because you deserve to have that support regardless of the outcome. And your pregnancy should not be only, you know, like, considered like worthy news if it's viable. And I think that that just, again, just sort of like perpetuates this whole, like, well, unless it's, you know what I mean, like a healthy live birth, then, you know, no one needs to know about it. And that is just so toxic. So to answer your question, it's really, really common. And I always remind people that they are more than welcome to share whenever feels aligned and right for them, and not because someone else may or may not feel uncomfortable with it.
That's really helpful, Alexa. I never thought about the women who do wait and then they do miscarry, and now they are literally managing all those feelings all by themselves. That is so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And, you know, the first trimester for so many people, especially if you've had a loss before, friends or family that have miscarried, it is just, you're holding your breath for 12 weeks, you know, and again, there's no safe point in pregnancy. So I don't want to like perpetuate this again, like, oh, once it's 13 weeks, you know, whatever. But I think that like society tells us, okay, wait 12 weeks. And then second year, 13 weeks, there's some change or whatever. But I think, again, like, to your point, it's like that is when so many women need the most support, because it's so scary. You know, most people are very aware of what their risk of miscarrying is. And that's when they really, really need and deserve support. And so I just think it's so unfair to have them go that entire first trimester without support.
Yes, very helpful. So, Alexa, do you want to go over all these things while having a child already?
I can touch on another population that I'm really passionate about that I see a lot is second-time moms. So moms who are having their second or third child. I would say in my case, mostly moms coming in, you know, they have a child and they're considering having another one, or they just found out they were pregnant with their second, and you know, they're really nervous because being pregnant with your first and not having another child to take care of, and being postpartum without another child to take care of, is so different than pregnancy with a toddler or with another child, and postpartum that way too. Because, you know, I think for a lot of people, and myself included, it felt like my first pregnancy was very much like, you know, I could ask for support that was directly like supportive to me. And in my second pregnancy, I asked for support that was supportive to my son. So like if someone wanted to help during my first pregnancy, I could be like, great, like, yeah, I would love to, like, you know, have lunch together, or if we could go for a walk together, that would feel really good and really supportive. And during my second pregnancy, I felt like, you know what, like, I just need help with my son. And I needed help too, but I felt like I needed more help with my child needed more help than I did. And so I missed out on a lot of support that I got the first time around, because the support the second time around just went kind of directly to my son, who was 2 years old. And so I think being pregnant, especially when you already have a child, can be like really, really lonely, because yeah, like any of the support you do get, you typically redirect to your child because you're so exhausted, and that does feel really helpful. But I just want to remind people that, like, it's a different bucket and it's a different need. So like, yes, 100% you need childcare, 100% you need, help with like your older child. And that doesn't negate or take away that you also need and deserve support for you, as the pregnant person. And so that's something that's really big. And really similarly, like postpartum, like, yes, I know that it's very supportive for sure to have someone help, with your older child when you're, postpartum with your second. And that doesn't, like, you still need support for yourself. You know what I mean? And so someone coming over and taking your other kid out for a couple hours is super helpful and is a different bucket than someone actually coming over to support you and taking care of yourself and taking care of your postpartum body. And so I always like to like remind people of that because I think it is so important. And it's sort of like, okay, this person offered to help. Who would be really helpful to help with your older child? And who would be actually really helpful to help with you? Because both of those people matter. And also, how can we make this like labor and delivery, or I guess pregnancy, labor and delivery, and postpartum? What can we take from the first time around that like was really helpful and went really well that we definitely want you to be able to do again? And what are some things that we want to do differently? You know what I mean? And I think, as much as it is really, really difficult to have, another child while you have your baby, there is definitely this sense that I think a lot of moms have of like, confidence. They know they've done this before. They know they've survived it before. They know the baby eventually will start sleeping. I think when it's your first, you have no idea if there's ever going to be an end to, those really, really challenging stages. And then, doing it for a second time, you often are at a place where you're like, okay, this is really hard, but I know it's not going to be like this forever. And that really increases confidence. And so I would say, there's obviously a lot of, challenges to having multiple kids, but there's also, there's confidence that you didn't have the first time around that I think is really empowering for a lot of people. And then again, like someone like me who had a really traumatic birth the first time, I did so much research before my second birth. I was so much more prepared. I had so much better support. I had my doula, and other things that I did. I went to therapy. And so, it really can be a different experience your second time around. And I would also say something that I work a lot with and that I see a lot is some moms, when they have their second, they are bonding really, really quickly with the baby, and they're feeling much more disconnected and not disinterested, but kind of in their older child. And then other moms that are having a really difficult time bonding with the baby and already just want to be with their older child because obviously they've already, had a year or 2 or 3 to form a relationship and a bond with them. And so both of these are totally normal. Both of these are totally common. You know what I mean? I always like reassure people you are not a bad mom. Like your relationship with both of your kids is totally going to, balance out. There's just going to be times when the reality is when you have multiple kids, you just feel closer to one of them sometimes than you do with the other, and vice versa. And if you feel more connected to your baby than you do with your older kid, like that is totally normal and okay. If you feel closer to your baby than you do with your older kid, that's okay too. So I like to, make sure people are aware of that prior to walking into it, just sort of like set the expectation and also reassure them that that is not like, well, that's just how your relationship is going to be now with each of your kids.
Very, very good to know. Thank you, Alexa. If people listening want to work with you or have questions for you or want advice, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram, you can find me. It's at Therapy for California Moms. And then my website is therapyforcaliforniamoms.com. I am only licensed to see clients in California. So if you are in California, I offer virtual therapy to women anywhere in the state. And if you're not, I am happy to provide you, like either a list of other providers or at least some sort of like places to start looking for a provider that is in your state, because it is state specific. So yes, happy to help out with that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alexa.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing and for coming on our show and for also helping us speak to this population, because we also want these women to feel just as included and just as valuable and just as part of our community, even though Ari and I have chosen to not make children, but we still also want to see all the women that come with children. We want to help. We want to help you with body image, with postpartum, both in an exercise standpoint and in a mental health standpoint, for sure.
And I think just like overall with our listeners, like, please don't judge yourself. Please know you're not doing anything wrong or bad, or you're not good enough. If you feel these feelings of insecurity, you can reach out to Alexa, you can reach out to myself. We'll talk about it. But you are doing an amazing job. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
I totally agree. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on UpLift Women's Wellness.
We're so grateful to have you as part of our community. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it.
Follow us on social media for updates and extra inspiration between episodes.
And remember, you're stronger, braver, and more capable than you know. Until next time,
Stay strong, stay empowered, and keep uplifting each other.